ecological transition. And over the next 15 minutes, I'm just going to sort of share lots of things with you, and then in the panel discussion, we can go further into that. And I guess I'm probably very different to most speakers here today. So I'm really okay with, like, if we have a bit of a debate or chat about things that feel like, are those connected? Is this a connected story? Gosh, that data is quite harsh. So please do know that I welcome that, but also be friendly, because I'm out of my comfort zone being at a conference like this. So I want to just be able to share a little bit about. So next slide, please. I wanted to share. Oh, yeah. So I want to share a little bit about the context behind the work that we're doing, and I guess this slide from the front page of the IPCC Working Group 1 report really sort of encapsulates the many different layers of the work that we're trying to do here at Civic Square. And this bottom line where it talks about the future being different no matter what, just how different is our choice, is where we situate ourselves really clearly. I think it's really important to situate Civic Square's work in the fact that we are really looking at what is going to be the impacts on the most vulnerable communities in the escalating and increasing social and ecological crises that are converging on our neighbourhoods, a place where we are seeing all over the world, particularly in the global south and now converging into the global north, the impacts of us being close to breaching 1.5 and the directionality that we're going in. So it's with this kind of openness and honesty about the scale of challenge that we work with our communities, with our neighbours, but not in a way to scare and terrify and make us frozen into inaction, but instead a way to liberate and look at how we can innovate within that problem space, how we can use our greatest imaginations, how we can connect multiple stories together, of which one is really critical for us, is the work we do with Retrofit. And so again, giving the backdrop of that work, really looking at some of the depth and breadth of the key risks to the UK and how they converge on our neighbourhoods, is how we have been working with our neighbourhood in Ladywood and with many other neighbourhoods across the country and world who are also interested in this type. And on the right, you can really start to see the significance of some of the challenges that we are facing. This is not just can we keep our houses insulated? This is overheating. This is the multiple connections between ourselves and our food systems. It's between our aging populations and our crumbling social infrastructure. It's around our migration policies and what is going to happen. These are not siloed issues. And of course, there is a technical and practical and very deep approach that we can take to our streets. But we focus at Civic Square to not see these in isolation, and also not to see them in isolation when we're working with our communities, really looking at how our communities and neighbourhoods are able to have and grow their capacity of knowledge and what is coming, what is happening, connecting it to where they may have lived or come from prior to being in the UK, but also looking at what bold and ambitious approaches to how we can transition look like. And I think here's a little bit of what our work looks like. It's a lot of this and a lot of this, and it's a lot of very hands-on and connected work across the neighbourhood of Ladywood. But the critical piece for us about this is that when we're talking about transition, it's really critical to situate things like the scale of the type of retrofit and the scale of the challenges that I mentioned before that need to be recognised and stepped up to, are not things that we have not had approaches to in the past. We at Civic Square have got loads of work about different types of civic transition infrastructure over many other huge transitions in history, and that often was first imagined, grown, built at the scale of the neighbourhood, at the scale of our communities. Sometimes it was responding to a challenge, but even the NHS was born out of a group of workers creating a medical co-op, putting I think 2 pence a week from their salary into a pot, in order to start building the blueprint of what would then go on to be the NHS. And so when we're talking about many of these compounding and uh, large crises, what we're trying to talk about is looking at our current huge challenges and intersecting those in a way that can really build capacity, resources, knowledge, infrastructure at the scale of the neighbourhood. And often people will say to us, but there isn't the money for this, and well, how are we going to do this? And we need to deal with one problem at a time. And we fundamentally, from a lot of our research and a lot of our work, have seen that there is no linear step-by-step approach. We are going to have to take deeply systemic and holistic approaches. And the scale of the home street and neighbourhood for many centuries has been a place where organising the blueprint of how we move our societies forward, where new social settlements come from, is often born. And so we do that through a number of systemic demonstrators. And this is looking at the full stack of finance, governance, how we organise, the imagination, the how we operate it, and what it tangibly looks and feels like. And we try to build systemic demonstrators of what the future could be like in as much resolution and tangibility as possible, so that we're able to imagine that the systemic shifts that we also need to move alongside the retrofit revolution can also happen. And so there's a number of different ways we do that. And we look at, as I said, the dark matter, the dream matter, and the everyday matter. The dark matter really being the systems, the ownership, the design, the governance, the things under the surface that are often the boring revolution, but really critical to look at. The dream matter, which is being able to imagine futures beyond the one that we're locked into now, new imaginaries around economic systems, around the purpose of the economy, around how we might work together, how the working week might work, how our streets might look, what they might be dominated by. This idea that we need to be able to step out beyond just the lock-in of today's system, and we're able to imagine futures just as many before us have as well. And then for us, the everyday ordinary matter, the way it plays out on the street, in the home, in the neighborhood, in practical and tangible ways, but critically for us, never shying away from the scale of what we need to do. And at the heart of our work is this question: what if the climate transition and retrofit of our home streets and neighbourhoods were designed, owned, and governed by the people who live there? And there's a lot in that question. And so we've been really working on what are the containers and the entities and the ways in which we need to organise to do that. We're doing this in a number of ways, with our own retrofit of a large site, where we are trying to show what the building blocks of new, and not just new, actually bringing back civic infrastructures that have been disbanded and underfunded and dismantled from society, but really looking at what it means to have the microfactory and the materials lab, the community kitchen, the workspaces, uh, access to the skills, the knowledges, the data, the communities, each other at the scale of the neighbourhood. Not so every neighbourhood in the country goes and rebuilds a massive industrial site, but so that we can see these modules of what our future high streets, what our school playgrounds, what our empty spaces will need to transition to as we hit the worst of the social challenges that we're going to face, and build back better and stronger, and return to something much more in balance after that. At the heart of this work is also some really deep and fundamental work with looking at the scale of the challenges. This is our Ladywood neighbourhood donut, which shows how far we are exceeding planetary boundaries and how much we're falling short of meeting people's needs, but also looking at the heart of the economic ideas that sit underneath the transitions we're talking about. Kind of leads us to the piece where retrofit really forms quite a fundamental story within this for us. It is the demonstration of those, what that neighbourhood infrastructure, what that redesigning the purpose of the economy, what a much more participatory, democratic, neighbourhood-led approach where streets are able to work as collectives could look like. And so this is the third element of our work, where this idea of our retrofit and our reimagination of our home streets and neighborhoods really being designed, owned, and governed by the people who live there. So for us, yeah, fundamentally, the wealth generated from these incredible moments of opportunity with things like retrofit actually recirculate back into the community. They are not extracted out by large companies, huge shareholders. We're really looking at the skills base being built in the neighborhood. We're really looking at the infrastructure joining the neighborhood, and we're looking at really intergenerations to how we think about retrofit. And a great example of the practicalities of how you retrofit collectively, I think, is really shown by Raft and the work that they're doing, Retrofit Action for Tomorrow, who we've worked with um, during Retrofit Reimagined, which I'll talk about in a second. But yeah, fundamentally, our journey started like this story of like, okay, hold on a second. A few years ago, the large green green grants had a large amount of money go back to government because apparently there was low take up of housing retrofit. And we were mind boggled as a community that has worked for the last 12 years in Birmingham with thousands and thousands and thousands of neighbours and been worked with partners all over the country who are in convivial, bold, incredible movements. We were like, what do you mean? There's a low uptake of people wanting warmer, safer, cheaper to run homes, and to make these changes. All we can see is we're absolutely surrounded by them. So we started to do some work with Dark Matter Labs at really looking at what is going on here. And there's a lot of work that you can click on into the system maps. And we started to look at actually how devastating the impact of an underperforming home has on so many other pieces of life and parts of our sort of like, you know, UK PLC, what it's costing us all over the place, and the devastating impacts, as you can hear from many people like Kwejo Twenoboa, that it's having on people's lives who are living in poverty and are living in disgraceful conditions of homes. And so we did a bit more mapping to be like, well, look how many people this is costing. So we started to see the home, the street, and the neighborhood and the retrofit of our homes not just as a technical task that had to be delivered at people, but instead at the heart of a new reimagination, a new social settlement for the country, a way in which people could be at the forefront of reimagining their home streets and neighborhoods and feel real, tangible benefits to their streets being greener, safer, more collectively run, like we started to see at the beginning of the pandemic, but also warmer, cheaper to run. And through these things, we can start to talk about actually there are many other compounding crises that we need to be able to be mobilizing, building capabilities and capacities for. And at the same time, that whilst this was also happening, fundamentally for us, it cannot be true that a number of energy companies are extracting the largest profits they have in the recent decades, whilst we are seeing our communities experience this. So not only was it about being propositional, participatory, democratic, it was also being able to stand up and reclaim our agency of the level of extraction that is happening from our communities in the current idea of what our economic models need to look like. And so, fundamentally underpinning all of this, and I'm just going into the last few minutes now, just so the organisers aren't getting nervous, is a whole range of research which we're going to launch in February 2024, which is about the 3-degree neighbourhood. And it talks about the scale of shifts we need to make. And one example here, we've got many about material budgets, around how many material we actually have, a piece of work called The New Age of Imperialism, where actually we need to really reflect on as a country, are we able to, and do we have the material and carbon budgets to just do everything we want brand new, any expense, extract as much lithium as we want from Congo, take as much as we need, or do we need to actually be thinking much more holistically, much more connected collectively about the biomaterials work we need to do, so that in 20 or 30 years time things can be more biomaterials and bioregional, and not just a petrochemical approach to retrofit, but also things like the types of shifts we're going to need in our land use to allow that to be true, Or, for example, in this piece of research we've done, even though it's not directly connected to retrofit, but very much, also shows how far off we are at the moment around where we need to get to. For example, with the carbon emissions of new homes that we're building. And so for us, we know that actually there isn't just a technical task ahead. There is a fundamental reimagination of our relationship with land, with materials, with each other, of how we're going to organize, and actually how we're going to reshape and reimagine our neighborhoods to deal with some of the material constraints that will definitely be on us for the next 20 years, and some of the pre-planning we need to do to unlock a whole new biomaterial revolution for our future generations. So we're really trying to get into the nitty gritty, but not do it by ourselves. We're doing it with our neighbours, with our communities, and we're looking at what it means to radically redesign our streets together. And so there's a number of layers that work within this. We have an organising thesis on the demonstrator street that we're working with around how everyday participation is critical, how we have to nurture the collective agency, how it's critical to democratize the knowledge, not just do things at people or just consult them, how we unlock and cultivate imaginations, because it is the imagination that will help us to go beyond. But this is how we've always done things. This is how we've always lived. This is exactly what I need, and I want it all forever. And I don't want to think at all about the ecological and social balances that we are going to have to create, and how far we're overshooting in our own neighborhood. And what we found from the work is that people respond to this really well, really maturely, really invested in what it takes to build a collective approach. And we have tons of examples in that. And I think I've seen John Christopher's in the chat. He's here because what we did was come together as a collective last year to bring together something called Retrofit Reimagined, which really took a lot of those systemic challenges that I was just talking about, and actually said, okay, well, what would that actually mean in the shifts that we're talking about? So if you go to bit.ly/Retrofit Reimagined, which I can put in the chat, there's a lot more detail here, but it starts to talk about how we have to shift from an individualistic, petrochemical, market-led only approach to retrofit, and have to move towards much more collective, participatory, democratic, common good approaches. And really practically, these aren't all just big visions, they're also super practical. In the process of Retrofit Reimagined, we heard about what happens when a street has £10,000 per home and there's 40 homes, and the contractors come out 40 times, maybe 80 times. They do each house individually. Nobody knows what anybody else is doing. They're not working together on thinking, how is £400,000 on that street best invested? What happens when you need to work with the social landlords, the private landlords, and the people who are owners? And what does that look like when it's different types of tenure? People were making like a range of interventions into the home that were good and important, but not the most critical ones, because that was all that was available at that time. And so this idea that we are also just really practically not spending the money we are trying to spend on this most generatively, most collectively, in a way that looks at what does this street need, instead of what does this program say that this 10 grand can be spent on. It isn't just the radical reimagination. Some of this is just really practically not good practice. And so these shifts talk about this move from a very centralized, market-led profit approach to a much more distributive by design, generative approach to how we a regenerative approach to how we can think about our retrofit, and how we can be at the forefront of a real social and civic revolution at the heart of the country, at the scale of things like the NHS and other things before it, where we were fundamentally able to democratize as much knowledge into the hands of people where they are, just like the neighborhood GPs did for a huge national system on health. And so over the last couple of years, we did a large festival. We just finished one across the country in England, Scotland, Wales. And to cut to the chase, and there'll be loads more coming out about this over the coming weeks, including a really, really beautiful film that I've just got a preview of. without a shadow of a doubt, neighborhoods and communities all across the country were out in their hundreds and multiple thousands, getting practical, building in microfactories, learning about biomaterials, learning about governance, working on their street, connecting on street demonstrators. And we were also in Balsall Heath and Birmingham, where incredible work is happening. This is a little bit of it, what it looked like last year. This year it was all over the country. And at the heart is this real deep understanding that retrofit is just a technical task. It is actually something that needs to sit at the intersection of the scale of ecological and social challenges that we have created, that are coming, and how we move back into a balance, a safer planetary and people balance. So we're working really deeply in our neighbourhood and with neighbourhoods across the country that want to do this at a street scale. And we are organising with people around the practicals, the technicals, the imagination, the finance, the governance, and so on and so on. And we're going to be doing a practical demonstrator street, and you can maybe imagine it in your radical imagination, or you can also just imagine it that if you had 40 houses on a street and they could spend 10 grand each, we could definitely spend 400 grand more collectively, more in the common good, more systemically, and we could really think more collectively about the approach we do take, because we cannot usher in a new age of imperialism where we in Britain take as many materials, as many resources, mine as much as we want for our transition, without having any thought about the impacts that that will have on the wider system. So it's really a delight to be here with you in the panel. I'm happy to share more about the practicals and the tangibility and the beautiful participatory work that we have been lucky to do, as well as Retrofit Reimagined, which we did with multiple partners. But for now, I'm just going to leave you with that, which was a bit of an overview of who we are. Thank you very much.
Excellent, Imi. Thanks so much. What a fascinating insight and approach you've shared with us there. So do remember to join us at 11 o'clock, Imi, for the panel session. But just turn your camera and mic off now, and we'll crack on, because we are running a bit over now. But we can make up the time if we move on very quickly to the question of looking at some numbers now. Data is a key aspect to the approaches that are required and the scale of the challenge. So we're going to hear now from Gemma Brooks from Orbit to give us some insights as to their approach to data, and then we'll move on shortly after that with a presentation from Retrofit Academy, Jenny Pierpoint, looking at the partnership that they formed with Birmingham City Council, the data that they've been looking at as well, and then what that looks like in terms of the scale of the challenge for the current SDF funded program, and then the opportunities for the supply chain. Fascinating stuff. So let's start with Gemma.